All right. Well, hello there. Welcome to the Deadly Analysis Podcast. My name's Noah Adam. I'm here with my co-hosts Ben and Shayra, and today we are going to be talking about and analyzing The Eyes of My Mother, but not the film. Like, we're actually going to be talking about my mom and her eyes and like the color, the darkness underneath it. Those. Okay. I don't have problems. I don't know why I led that way. No, we're going to be talking about what is to me like a really messed up horror movie, very psychologically explorative horror film. And that's the film, The Eyes of My Mother, not her actual eyes. Although, which is scarier? Anyway, this movie is directed by Nicholas Pesh, and it tells the story of Francisca, played by Kika Magalhães, who has essentially been unfazed by death from an early age because of her mother, formerly a surgeon in Portugal, who imbued her with a thorough understanding of human anatomy. And so when tragedy shatters her family's idyllic life in the countryside, which is kind of code word for a serial killer like stabs her mom to death in the tub, spoiler alert, when this happens, her deep trauma gradually awakens what we'll say are some unique curiosities. And as she grows up, her desire to connect with the world around her takes a distinctly dark form. So I'll start the podcast this way. This movie should have been called Maladaptive, the story of Francisca, as told in 3 chapters. This movie's like if Ingmar Bergman directed Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And my initial thoughts about this movie are it's a lot like movies we've covered before on this podcast, like a bunch of them all combined. And I'm curious if you guys saw this as maybe a positive or a negative. All right. Like, so it has kind of like the monochrome visuals of Eraserhead, family dynamics of Texas Chainsaw Massacre with like an art house touch, like a girl walks home alone at night. It has all of these sort of like vibes. It's such a strange combination of like the beautiful and the profane and the stunning and the hideous. So I thought I would start the podcast off by posing a question to you. And that question is, if you had to choose an abductor, that is, let's say you know you're going to get abducted and this person has the potential to abduct you and torture you, and you got a choice. Would you rather be abducted by Annie Wilkes from Misery, a Princess from The Loved Ones, a Sami from Audition, or Francisca in The Eyes of My Mother? Like a truly deep philosophical question here. And notice, by the way, these are all like women abductors and torturers. Like, lest anyone say the horror genre is not open to the ideals of gender equality. In fact, I would actually argue that these choices are worse than Jigsaw. They are worse than the killers in Hostel or any of those guys. I mean, that's my opinion, but damn, I'd rather take Jigsaw than a Sami from Audition. My God. But if you were going to get, if you were going to get abducted, who would you choose? You get to choose your abductor. Who do you choose?
I am going with Annie Wilkes without a doubt. I mean, that's honestly got to be the best setup. You know what I mean? It's like this nice, comfortable bed. She feeds you, and you know how much productive time this guy gets in, like through the course of his abduction. Like he sits there, he has to have written the total of at least like 3 books worth of material. You know what I mean? It's really not so bad. Yeah, she's got a little bit of a temper. You know, maybe she's a little bit abusive, codependent. At least she's not melting your brain with boiling water. You know what I mean? Like you can live without your kneecaps, whatever.
Actually, the thing is if you go with Annie, the other thing that comes from it is after you get out of this situation and write the story the way she wants it, I mean, you've become super famous. Someone tried to abduct you and make you write a certain story for them. All of your stuff is going to be huge after that. Like, you're not, everything you write, even if it's garbage, is going to, everybody's going to buy it anyway. Because they're like, oh, that's the guy who got kidnapped. He's probably all fucked up in the head now. I'm going to read his books.
Yeah. Now, the thing I'd be worried about, though, Ben, is that she would probably, for you, do more than break your ankles. I feel like she'd be giving you, like, here's how I want the book written. And then your response, because I know you, would be like, yeah, but that just doesn't jive with this character. Next thing you know, you're like fucking arms broke. Your fingers are broke. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like if she made you, okay, Annie Wilkes tells you to rewrite the 7th seal, but it's like a Christian 7th seal, and it has to have Christian values and ideals. And instead of like talking about like the wonders of, like, instead of talking about the fears of death and all of that, it's about Jesus and it's about God, and it has all of the things that are antithetical to your own personal ideals, your ethics, your religious beliefs, and you have to do it. I can see you at least at some point saying, just maybe questioning Annie just a little bit, and then losing more than just your ankles. What do you think?
Maybe one time, maybe you get that original kind kind of like test out there to see how well she takes it. But, frankly, I mean, she's putting me up. She's giving me free food, loading me up with painkillers. Whatever. It's all right. I could do worse.
Fair enough.
Francesca, she was hooking her chained up victims with food. I mean, she held them in her lap and fed them delicious,
but the difference
human parts. I think is what they're hinting at. Was that cannibalism that they were like? She feeds the trapped up people human flesh. Is that what it was hinting at? I
think that's what was insinuated. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I wasn't reading it wrong. Art house can be very confusing to me at times. So they like cut here, cut there, cut this, and I'm like, am I supposed to interpret it this way? Because she did grab the dead rat, and then he was eating after that, and I'm assuming she's feeding him a dead rat. So.
Hey, she's doing her best, man. Make do with what you got. What do you think, Shayra? Who's your abductor? Who's your torturer? That's a good argument for Annie. I'm a fan of this. I get it.
I mean, it's so hard because I think in audition you don't really have a chance of survival. I think you're dead, and like that piano wire scene is not okay. If I ever had, that's worse than getting hit with a sledgehammer. I think slicing with a piano wire.
Oh, needles in the eye too. Remember?
No. And the loved ones. Here's my question about Princess. Does she boil everyone's brains, or is if a guy like goes, oh, okay, yeah, I love you, let's settle down, I'll act just like your daddy? Is she gonna all of a sudden be like, I'm not gonna put you in my torture,
I don't think so. I think she does it to everybody, because there was a bunch of dudes down there, and I'm sure at least one of them all probably said what she wanted to hear. But I think that's her thing, right? Is that they're never really her dad. They're never really good enough. They're never really her dad. Her dad is who she really wanted.
It's so troubling.
It is. It totally is. It's a fucked up question. It's a fucked up question to consider.
Yeah, but like, I mean, if I'm gonna get my brains boiled no matter what, then that's really not a good road to go down, right? And then having your eyes gouged out and not being able to scream kind of gave me some Motel Hell flashbacks, or they're just like their heads are out of the ground going. I was like, I really think that I think I already read about this being the truth. But I think as a film student, this director just wanted to give shout outs to like everything he's ever seen. And it kind of became a blended thing of all these things that are pretty awesome. So I saw a lot of different horror movies when watching this. But I don't like the idea of having no ability to talk and no ability to see. So I think Annie's really the only way to go, because you don't want boiled brains, you don't want to be dead. You don't want to be blind and incapable of talking.
So we have two for Annie. So let me give you my answer. I would not choose Annie. I'll tell you why. I would rather be abducted and tortured by Francisca of all of those people from the eyes of my mother. I'm totally serious. Okay, and my reason is like super hetero, right? And that is
she was hot.
Well, that's one reason. I'm a sucker. I'm a slave to my, to my things. I can't, I can't help it. I'm a slave to my passion. So I would say, like, all right, here's the way I look at it. Francisca allows me to be alone most of the time. I dig that. She doesn't damage my mind, so that's kind of good. She doesn't like bore a hole in my head and give me a lobotomy like Princess. She occasionally likes to do the horizontal mambo. I'll take it. She's cool with hooking up with her captors. I'm just saying, she's the only one as far as I know. She feeds you pretty regularly at times. She bathes you. She sings to you. That was kind of cool. At least two of Maslow's hierarchy of needs are met with Francisca, is what I'm saying. So Princess, on the other hand, she's going to lobotomize me, throw me in a pit with a bunch of other lobotomized dudes, and then I got to be around people. I don't know what I'm looking at because I'm lobotomized. Don't even get me started with Asami from Audition. That's the worst option imaginable. Annie Wilkes is going to break my ankle. She's going to make me type shit every day. She's anxiety to me. That is stressful. I'd rather, that is so stressful. The idea of Annie Wilkes is the most stressful option to me. Like,
so the thing that upsets you the most is having homework?
Oh my God, totally. Totally. Like I can take losing my sight, losing my voice. Just feed me, sing me some lullabies, and bang me every once in a while. I'm good. I just don't want the stress of having to type shit out every day. If I don't type it right, my legs get broke, my ankles get snapped. Like that's so psychologically horrifying to me. Like I couldn't function that way. I'd rather just not have a voice, be like, oh, nobody wants to hear me talk anyway. Just keep to myself, feed me, sing me lullabies. I'm good. I'm dead serious. So that's my choice. I would choose Francisca.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, she's my girl. As girls go for torturers and
Yeah.
captors. Yeah. So let's talk about loneliness. That fun, wholesome topic. So to what extent do you think that loneliness played a role in Francisca's aberrant development in comparison to, say, like familial connection or the trauma of her mother being murdered? So in other words, like, which do you think fucked her up more? The social isolation aspect, the familial relationship with her mom and her dad, or just the trauma of like her mom dying? I know all of those things are super important, probably all played a big role. But I think, like, I would argue the trauma of her mother being murdered and then how her father handled the murder and subsequent raising of Francisca was really the primary catalyst for like how she became who she became. Before this, I think it's safe to say that she had like very odd interest in death and surgery, but we could at least maybe chalk that up to like her mom's influence, right? Like she looked up to her mom as a surgeon. But when her mom was killed, it sort of like froze things in place. Like it froze her ethical and her social growth, and they kind of ended there. You know what I mean? Like her dad clearly didn't want to help her grow as a person or develop in any way, shape, or form. He clearly just like wanted to be out of the picture for whatever reason. We really don't know. It follows, by the way. Like parents are gone, even if they're there, they're away. They're not doing the work they need to do. And so I think this fact mixed with like maybe a proclivity towards psychopathy led Francisca to kind of like completely freeze in her development. And so like it's interesting to think about social isolation, familial damage, and trauma, all things that happen in the real world to real people as potential catalysts for aberrant behavior. So I think it gets even more interesting when like none of these things occur, but the person still ends up turning out to be a psychopath or a sociopath. So think of like We Need to Talk About Kevin, movie like that, where like nothing really bad like in this movie happens to the person, but they end up having aberrant behavior and end up, murdering essentially. And maybe the more dark comedy version of that is Excision, which is another awesome film we've covered. But like, where do you guys land in this? Like, to what extent do you think loneliness did the work here?
Here's the thing about this, and it's actually kind of like a unique sort of thing about this movie that I found pretty interesting, is that you really don't see much of the downtime. I mean, like they do their best, I think, to show a very particular side of the character development of Francisca, right? I mean, like you only kind of see the inflection points in her like life where the trauma is. Of course, like the death of her mother, the death of her father, like the keeping of like this child whenever she kind of like gets a little bit too lonely or what. I mean, it's like you kind of like only see these points when she's getting herself into some kind of like dangerous behavior or she's getting caught. And so it's really hard to say what the effect of loneliness actually would be, except in the expression of her saying, I don't want to be alone anymore. You don't see the alone time. You just see kind of like these points in which she's interacting with other people and it goes badly. And so I think it's really easy to say, well, it's clearly because of this trauma. Because I mean, especially if you compare it to a movie like Babadook, where at the end you kind of have the mother who has sort of figured out how to balance herself with her trauma, but still kind of keeps it in the basement. It's down there. You got to pay attention to it every now and again. Well, that's kind of how I saw her keeping the guy that killed her mother. I mean, it's like it's there. It's in the back of your mind. She's feeding it, she's keeping it, she's taking care of it. In the analogy that we see about eyes, it's like that event becomes the lens through which she sees the rest of her experience. And so it's because of that, I think, that the loneliness is able to do the work, is because she's focusing the loneliness through a particular lens.
Yeah, totally. There's a lot of this film about what you don't see. There's, you know what I mean? A lot of this is what's off screen. We don't see your mom actually die. We just see the aftermath of it. There's a lot of this stuff in here that is, you just have inference to what is going on, and you just see the aberrant behavior that takes place after, which is obviously done on purpose, but it does make you think about those things.
Yeah, I mean, like even to that point too, even the violence. When we were talking about this and leading up to this podcast discussing this movie, Noah, you positioned it as being potentially like more violent even than Antichrist, which we always also reviewed. Um, Incredibly focused in its violence, Antichrist is, and so the limited scenes with which you actually have real violence, it's incredibly potent. I think this movie is actually a little bit more Hitchcockian in that you don't really, I think, if I'm remembering it correctly, I mean, because it feels very violent, but I don't think you actually see the violent parts. It's like even when she's like stabbing that woman, you kind of hear what's going on. You sort of see her moving around. You don't really see a wound. You don't see a lot of blood or anything like that. You don't see her doing the surgeries. You just sort of see the after effects of the surgeries, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's really interesting, yeah, because I mean it is doing a huge amount of work off screen, making you feel things and thinking they're there, even if they're not like visually depicted. It's very kind of a cool trick that they're able to do.
Well, that's one of the things that it makes things more violent because your own imagination's more fucked up than whatever they could put on the screen. One of the things I like to watch is the giallo horror. You get a lot of just visceral blood and chopping of bits and pieces off of people, just very, very violent, and it can be quite fun. Of course, a lot of people think that it's very misogynistic, but I have a lot of fun watching those ultra violent movies. But I certainly felt way more uncomfortable when she's holding Charlie and stabbing him. You don't see the stabs. You even are wondering, is she stabbing him? I think he's getting stabbed. I think she oh, you know what I mean? And the way they build up to it, where you're like almost inside the house watching him trying to figure out how to get away, but when you're blind, I don't know if you guys know about this issue when you can't see. You think that you're walking a straight line, but you're actually doing a weird, like snail shell little pattern. Your brain can't fathom that you're walking, the right direction because you can't see. So I think what was happening was he was just wandering around out in the yard because he can't walk a straight line. So they knew to depict that and show her kind of creepy deeping on him, like.
Yeah, just slowly sort of walking out.
It's so creepy. Like the build up to it, the suspense of it, and then there's no payoff, if you will, but it's so much more fucked up in a way. So
Yeah,
I think showing it that way, it did make it more violent, right? It almost made it more intimate too, weirdly.
In a way, yeah. I mean, it's like it's very calm and very cold, and like you don't get a lot of reaction out of her, and that's supposed to be the point, right? Is that her reactions to these kinds of violences, much like the surgeries, is just completely flat. And I think, yeah, that definitely does emphasize it in the same way that it did in like in House That Jack Built. It's like where he's able to kill, and it's just not. I mean, there's not like a whole lot of music or soundtrack around it. It's just that he does this thing and they're dead now, and it makes it seem so much more extreme.
Yeah, and I remember telling you, like, hey, like we're gonna do The Eyes of My Mother, and it's up there with Antichrist. And when I said that, I hadn't seen the movie in like years, and so so I just, but that's what I think this movie does to you is that like it makes like I remember it being ultra violent, but then when I watched it this time, I was like, well, not really. I mean, it certainly feels. That's a great way to put it. It feels very violent, but visually, it's nowhere near a lot of the stuff that we covered, which is very interesting. I mean, I think that speaks to how well the way it dances around the violence, hints at it, makes you feel it without seeing the knife go in, which I think is a skill in and of itself.
The main thing that terrified me about this movie, the fear that it picked out for me, because of her isolation, because of her being raised by a father who wasn't really there, she was obviously antisocial and had behavioral issues. So when she's interacting with two of the main women in the movie, you could tell that the women are uncomfortable. You can tell that everything is firing off in their mind that something is off here. They should probably not be interacting in this way. You could tell that everything was going, no, 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 go away. But part of the problem with this country, and I noticed it's in this freaking country because other countries don't have this bullshit, is these pretend behavioral like politenesses that we're supposed to do to complete strangers for no fucking reason at all. They didn't earn our trust to hold our babies. They didn't earn our trust to go to their house alone at night. but yet we're going to do it because, you know, they seem like they're trying to be nice, normal person people. Like, no.
It's very creep. It's very like creep 2. Remember, this is what we explored in Creep 2. Where's the line, right?
Yeah. And that was what's so weird, is having the woman be that person, right? Because a lot of women feel like they can be comfortable around women, but these women were even like, this girl is a little weird. Like, I don't know how I feel about her. The kissing scene was super uncomfortable. I've never felt so uncomfortable.
Speak for yourself. I was, yeah.
Oh, it was so awkward.
But you're right. Like, she had a very flat affect, Francisca, throughout social moments where she should have been a little more, I don't know, more socially adept. If she was somewhat like the woman who was there with her that night. She seemed like she was like trying to make conversation, and this is kind of weird, but you know, maybe this person doesn't get out much. You know, she was doing the work, right? She was very Patrick Bryce in Creep, right?
Yes. It did give those vibes, except the cut. Once again, the edits. You know, she's just like, nah, you know, I think I gotta go. I gotta go cut cleaning some stuff off of a floor.
That's right. That's right.
And I had to rewind it because I was like, did I miss something? What happened? Okay.
Well, see, I mean, of course, we've been talking about this, and I think we've been sort of lauding it as sort of like a good thing. But I mean, do you feel like you're sort of satisfied by that depiction of that type of depiction in a movie of violent acts? Like, because I mean, if you don't really, I don't know, because the subtlety is good, but I think what really marks that as like a good technique is if when it happens and you get what's happened, like it still hits you the same way. So if you kind of see it and you're not 100% sure what happens, is that kind of like an error? Is it a flaw in the movie, or is it just because it's...
Because like what I honestly did, I rewound it and then I rewound it again, and the thing is I saw where the blood is, but she was over by the door. That means that she must have been chasing her around the kitchen. Maybe some weapons were like what? And so you start to try to fill in the blanks with something way more fucked up than they probably could have come up with. And then I'm like, you bastards. You are making me so morbid. I'm watching this movie and imagining, you know, how I would have played out the between part. That's so messed up.
Yeah, like, and you know, the film does give you, it's interesting because it does give you like maybe 1 or 2 very small sequences where she's violent, when she kills her mom's serial killer and she stabs him. And even then she has flat affect. You don't see the knife go in. And it's more poetic than anything else. So personally, I liked not seeing that woman die. I like the implication because I'm trying to figure out why. I think it, when I think of like the flat affect of Francisca, it would be strange for me to see her just slicing and dicing. It's scarier for me to have it implied and let my brain go, damn, like, you know, and she's just cleaning with the same flat affect she has throughout the entire film. So that is an unsettling feeling as opposed to like the, oh my God, of ultra violence that we may be seeing. I like the unsettling nature of that a little more. And that's not always the case. Sometimes a nice good stabbing is right what we need in a horror film. But I think this did it just right to me. It hit my palate the right way. I'm not crazy, but yeah, I don't know. So Sherry, you went to why this movie scares you. Let me tell you why it scares me, and let me bounce these ideas off you, because I want to know if maybe you guys feel the same way. I think you will about one of these things. I don't know about the others. So this was my selection. I'm going to tell you why this movie unsettles me, and it unsettles me way more the second time watching it than it did the first. The first is one of the things we covered already, which is isolation, right? But when we unpack what that means in this movie, like Francisca has no idea that her actions are abnormal. She has no true reference for like normality because she's been pretty much isolated her whole life, right? Like she's the female equivalent of those brothers in the X-Files episode Home, right? Or they've just been isolated, except like she's like cute and she's not inbred, so I don't know if that works. But like you can sense the isolation in her when she goes to the bar. She brings that woman home, and when they get back, the scene where they're walking in specifically, there is a massive contrast in their body language. It's so striking if you go back and watch that scene, and I'll add it here to this video. But like Francisca's arms are very stiff; they're at her side. She's very mechanical when she walks. And this is in contrast to the other woman who's just like normal body language. So this is your home, it's really nice. And she's just trying to vibe, right? But not Francisca. There's a couple scenes where Francisca dances in this movie. And when she does, you get the idea that she knows what dancing means, but doesn't have like any real reference for doing it. It's very ingenious the way they did that. She's just kind of like, she dances how you would think somebody would if they just knew what dancing meant but didn't have any reference point for doing it. It's like me when I try to dance to 50 Cent in the club or something. Yeah, you can tell I'm completely socially isolated most of the time and I have no idea what I'm doing. So, I mean, I think what scares me off the bat is like that component of isolation, that it sort of like it results in no real frame of reference or any sort of normalcy for the person. The second reason this movie scared me is the familial aspect of it. You get the sense at a certain point in this movie that Francisca's just basically her entire thing is she's trying to recreate the family unit. Right? Places her father, dead corpse at the dinner table after he's dead. She bathes him. She steals a child that's not her. She digs up her mom, says, I'm lonely. I wish you were here. Her only friend is the serial killer who killed her mom. So like she's trying to recreate her family unit by way of a very aberrant necro-familial and probably very psychopathic persona, right? But she doesn't seem to know any better. Maybe this is a point of contention, but to me, she doesn't seem to know any better. She has no reference for what normalcy is. And in that sense, it reminded me a lot of Yorgos Lanthimos' film Dogtooth, where you have like children in this family that are raised in total isolation and they don't know it. And they're taught that words mean radically different things than they do socially. So the whole movie Dogtooth is kind of like the very end of Pontypool, right? Which we've covered in this podcast. Kiss means kill. Couch means toothbrush. Sex means pumpkin. That's what they're taught, right? So this film reminded me of that a little bit. It reminded me of Dogtooth in terms of like the radical lack of socialization, right? And I think that's important, right? There's no social frame of reference to couch Francisca's fractal self. In other words, Francisca has no idea who she is as a person in light of social categories like being a student, maybe a friend, a confidant, a girlfriend, right? None of that is in Francisca's world because she's only ever known like 3 or 4 people, and that's some horrifying shit. It's like the horrors of what that can do to a person. So basically, I guess what I'm saying is don't homeschool your kids. That's clearly what follows from this. Clearly from this movie, that's what follows.
The other movie that's kind of like that is Blue Lagoon. I know that's such a random thing to bring up, but these children that are on an island and their father figure dies when they're so young, so they're having to learn about all of the including like starting your period by just like existing. And you think about it, like I'm sure that she had a similar problematic childhood of not understanding what certain things are just because her dad wasn't very available. So I don't know, it's just seeing how she was trying to kiss that other girl, like it's very clear she hasn't really had that much experience, but she's had to have some experience because I think she's been chopping up people for a while for Charlie.
Well, she's probably also been practicing kissing on the serial killer that she has. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is another reason why it's my choice. But I'm just saying. So I think that follows too.
I mean, I think like the crazy thing about this to me, and thinking about that moment, like you were just talking about, where she is expressing like the desire to have her mother. Like, what's so cool about that scene is that she's expressing something very real and very relatable, I think. And like, if you think about a single mom who doesn't have her mother to ask all these like questions and stuff, that seems like a very real emotion that somebody would actually have, and you might even go to their gravesite and express that and cry and be there. It's just like she goes that extra step. It's like a little too, you know what I mean? It's like, that's the piece that I think is really sort of telling of her personality. Go ahead.
You know who else went the extra step? Addams Family. At the end of the original Addams Family movie from the 90s, they were all digging up family members as a fun family event. Yeah, you got to find certain family members, dig them up, say hello. So maybe they're just on par with Addams Family, and if we had the right kind of music and candor, then it would just be a funny family film.
Well, there you go. Yeah, it's all about the framing. Yeah, for sure.
And isn't there like actually at least one culture who does that today? There's a culture that digs up their dead and props them up for like once a year or maybe every 5 years to celebrate their life, and they actually take the corpses out of the ground and do that. I'll see if I can find the information on it, but I remember.
It's not the Day of the Dead, is it? It's not the Mexican Day of the Dead. Like,
I don't think so.
no,
I don't think so. I think it's something different. But I've seen pictures of it in like Nat Geo or something. I was watching something that had that, and it was recent, so I know it exists. I'll see if I can add it to the actual to the video here.
You were
And
right, Ben. It can be very wholesome. It's
yeah,
just that maybe culturally for us, we see that as not quite right. But I mean, if you think about Irish wakes, you have the body in the middle and everybody's drinking and like, hey, it's, and some people might look at that and go, that's really sick. But others are like, hey, I gotta have one last party with them. Come on.
drag me to hell, man. Remember they're all having the party and the body
Yeah.
falls on what's her name and lands on her, rips off her hair, and they're all eating and drinking. Totally. It's in a lot of movies we've covered, dude. This isn't
Yeah, maybe this is totally normal.
this isn't aberrant. What's aberrant is burying them. Clearly,
Ben, you've hit the nail on the head with this one. I don't think that's where you're going, but I'm going to take that as what you were saying.
Yeah, totally. I'll take credit for that. Yeah, for sure. That's exactly what I meant.
We're going to normalize that part because honestly, that makes a lot of sense too. If she doesn't have any social or cultural background on stuff, she would never know that that's something that's
taboo.
weird.
Totally.
It's just her mom,
The other thing about that too, what's crazy is that by the time we get to that point where little Antonio is kind of like grown up, you've had this huge time skip. And I mean, of course, you get that from child to adult Francisca, and then from like adult Francisca to mother Francisca. But in this particular point, it seems like maybe she's done a little more healing. And I don't know. I don't know if that's right because like, clearly she still is keeping a person out in the barn that has no eyes, So I mean, like it's all relative, I suppose. But I mean, she seems like a completely normal mother who misses her own mother and kind of like wants this feedback. And like, there's just so much normalcy and realness at that point. It's just kind of like too late because she's already sort of like fucked up her life because of like the trauma that's kind of like led her to make crazy decisions. But I mean, it gets so relatable and like you start to feel so much empathy for this person. I think by the end, I don't know, and that I think whatever. There's something in there that shows a lot of character growth, and something that allows her to work through that trauma. Like something happens there. Maybe I can't really put my finger on it, but she does seem to get better by the end, and for some reason, in my opinion.
I think that, so I would have felt that way more if she had if she had killed the mom, because to me, so there's two ways to look at this, right? I guess maybe let me fight myself here. Let me think about out loud. So when she has the child, there's a sense in which she's recreating the family unit, but now she's the mom and she has a kid. But it seemed to me that if that was done successfully, and she really felt the work that does to have a kid, she wouldn't need that woman in the barn anymore. But she keeps that woman in the barn, which is strange to me. I don't know if that's like a flaw in the movie or if that's the part of the cycle that she just can't get out of. That's all she knows is to have a friend in there always. I mean, I don't know if it's like a backup, maybe. I don't know. It would have made more sense to me if she goes, I don't need that person anymore. I now have this. I brought this child into the world in her own mind,
For sure. I mean, like I do see it's supposed to be a metaphor for like carrying the baggage of trauma, but yeah, from a narrative perspective, I think what you're saying probably makes sense.
Yeah, but you're right though. I think there is I mean, she still at the end of the movie has kind of a flat affect, but there's a glow, like a motherly, like I've seen a little more of the world now sort of thing.
Right.
Like she's had a new experience, but I think that goes back to like the idea that this is the homeschool analogy. Like she's had a new experience now out in the real world, essentially. I mean, it's a terrible experience. She stole a child, but she's raising a child and she now has a whole new fractal self. She's the mom Francisca now. So she has an entire new sphere to incorporate into her life. And so I think what you're seeing and what you're feeling is like growth. I totally agree with that. Yeah.
I mean, like you get that too, because she's telling the child at the very end of the movie, there's things you're going to learn about me. I don't want your opinion of me to change. And that sort of suggests that the kid has grown up completely absent of all this like weird stuff. You know what I mean? It's like she hasn't passed on this lens of viewing the world to her own child, which I think is kind of like the ultimate victory there, is that if you sort of follow the movie into its like very obvious depths, I think that's kind of like the best possible outcome, is that she doesn't pass that on. Although it seems like obviously she gets caught. So
that's what I was gonna say. That's what I was gonna say. Until I am right there with you until the fucking end, and then the end is the last. So that this segues into the last, and I think the most potent thing in this movie that scared me. It's a perfect place to jump onto this point, and that is that this movie is like a reminder about how familial norms can become like ritualized and ritualistic. So when we think of Francisca, she's kind of a broken record in a lot of respects. She watches all of the same movies over and over again. She listens to all of the same music. She eats dinner in the same chair. She plays with her serial killer buddy that she's had locked up year after year up until she doesn't need him anymore, I guess. But you can kind of see the leftovers of like what her parents left in her lap, like coping mechanisms, interests, and an overall kind of interpretation of the world. And in that sense, I think, not to always go back to this movie because it scared the shit out of me, but in that sense, it kind of goes back to like Hereditary, that it has us consider the idea that we're never really the product or that we are the product of those before us. We're never truly our own thing all the way down, and that our parents have, no matter what, like a very powerful influence over us, be it environmental, genetic, or even the complete absence of them from our lives. That plays a role too. So, you know, like for me, I don't like the thought of that. Like that thought in a horror movie scares me. It really does. It just bothers me to watch that cashed out in different ways. And, you know, I feel like this film also is just like, it reminds you of how easy it is maybe to warp the mind of a young person in their impressionable years. And we see this in the very last moment of the movie where it's implied that Francisca's son Antonio sees his mom die, just like she saw her mom die. Right? You hear the gunshots, the movie ends, and that familial ritual has ostensibly come to pass again. So like the trauma of watching the parent be killed is repeating itself. So that part, I guess it's that ritualistic component that it's reminding us can happen so very easily. That is like really the main reason this movie scared me.
So we start the movie where the trucker comes across the mom that had been trapped in the barn. Then we come back to that again. And then it, you know, cuts to the cops coming there. And all I can think of is how difficult it must have been for her to figure out how to communicate with the cops, what had happened, what's going to be happening there, where it was at, how to find it, like the difficulty of that situation, of them seeing how much she'd been tortured.
But she didn't. So, hey, maybe you guys can answer this for me. She didn't cut out their eyes. It looks like she just sewed them shut. Did you get that vibe too?
Oh, I don't know. They were really like swollen
Puffed
things. So I don't know if they were missing or if she just did things to them to make it so that they couldn't see anymore. I'm not sure. Maybe the eyes were in there.
If you think about it from like I don't know, if you really think about the original kind of lesson that she was taught about, like taking out the eyes and then cutting into the eye and taking out the lens, I feel like if she was going to be a serial killer, like that would be the ritual. You know what I mean? How we always talk about like there being
see their lens.
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean
things
that's
from their perspective and blah blah blah.
Yeah, exactly. Like however you want to like frame it or whatever. But I feel like that would be the thing that she would keep repeating. Would be like that thing that she learned from her mom.
That's a good point. You know what I mean? That's a good point. Yeah, like
maybe
at a certain
point they were sewn because the eyes are missing now, and so she sewed that area
like,
up.
She's clearly has to be talented at like mending wounds, because you got to think that, you know, she's stabbing people lethally. It seems like she stabbed what's her name, that Antonio's actual mom, Lucy or something, like whatever, whoever she is. It's like she got like a kidney shot in there, you know what I mean? And that will kill somebody, but somehow she's managed to sew this person up, stop that bleeding, remove the throat, you know, take care of the eyes, I guess, like maybe take out the tongue or something like that, you know, and this person is still alive after all of that. So, you know, clearly she's got some ability to kind of like put that stuff back together and stop bleeding and whatnot. Some actual surgical skill, if you will.
Guys, those Portuguese fucking surgeons, man, they know how to do it. They know how to do it. Jesus. Yeah. I mean, at a certain point in this movie, Francisca's mom, I don't know if you guys recall this, when one of the few early scenes, Francisca's mom tells Francisca the story of Saint Francis. And in that story, she tells her daughter that he died of an eye condition that also caused psychosis. You remember that? So that made me wonder, like, to what extent, since we're on the topic of eyes, like, to what extent the film connects the visual, that is what we can see directly with our eyes, with psychosis or with madness, like how those things are connected in the movie. Because when you think about our eyes, our vision, it's our like immediate way of interpreting the natural world, whether we like it or not, right? The idea is that we have this piece of machinery that can malfunction and can cause, in some instances, like in the instance of St. Francis, mental and cognitive impairment. So, I mean, that's first off, that thought is utterly horrifying in and of itself. That you can have that apparatus go haywire, and it's not even your brain, it's your eyes, and that can fuck up essentially your cognition. And I think it's one of like it's one of the major points in this movie that's danced around a bit, is the eyes of my mother, the cow's eyes, Saint Francis, who's Francisca, Saint Francis, died of an eye condition, also caused psychosis. Like, the eyes are really everything. Perspective is really everything. There's a lot of that in this movie dancing around. I feel like there's a lot of meat there. Yeah, so I thought I'd just throw that out there. Like, the role of the eyes in this, connecting the visual with psychosis. Like, how do you guys see these as being connected in the movie?
Well, I mean, I definitely think that's sort of like the thread there, is that, you know, of course, Francisca's mother kind of like passed on this sort of trauma, sort of like set the perspective, set the lens by which she's able to see the world. But like, because of that perspective, she does end up being kind of like this twisted and sort of like psychotic person, who kind of like works through her own trauma and sort of deals with the world in ways that are completely like non or are maladaptive. You know, I mean, I think like when you really sort of think about that thread, I mean, that seems like the clearest sort of like central, most I think like potent message to me. But also kind of like the real weight of that is like what you were talking about, how there's kind of like no choice about it. That's just sort of forced on you. It's like, it's not really your job. You have no formative control over the lens through which you're going to see the world. It's just something that happens to you in a sense. And by the time you become aware of it, you know, it's kind of already there, right? So yeah, I mean, like, thinking about sort of like the existential dread of that, and like how there's really sort of like no way to escape that. I think what's really interesting there is that it sort of implies that this entire string of events, from this man coming and attacking her family all the way to the very end, like, none of it can really be said to be her fault. Like, I think there's an interesting sort of like moral culpability question there, which of course, like, I think that's going to immediately clash with a lot of people's ideas about retributive justice and like what it means for like free will and stuff like that. But I think really kind of like the implication there is like, when you pass on this lens for viewing the world to a young person, you're the one that kind of like determines in a way the course of their life and the actions, even to an extent, that they're going to take. But then also, the person before you who did that to you sort of did the same thing. And so it really kind of like takes out the choice in the entire chain, right? I mean, it's really just a bunch of people sort of reacting within these frameworks that were completely handed to them with no control of their own. Yeah, I mean, like, so I don't necessarily know if it was meant to be kind of like an existential horror more than a familial horror, but it certainly has those elements there as well.
Do you guys think that the dad or that Francesca were acting out in vengeance with Charlie?
I think the dad probably was. I don't think Francisca. I don't know if she has enough apparatus at that time to really even conceptualize vengeance. I don't know. I mean, like, when she was
He
young.
did just drag him into the barn and then let his daughter just use him as a plaything. Was that an act of vengeance, or was he just like,
I see.
what was his deal? I
Well,
can't figure him out.
I can't even wonder if he was aware of that. Like, because like, for the after the point at which Francisca's mother gets murdered, like, you really sort of see him as being kind of like this distant, ineffectual, you know, like, non-actor, right? And just in the way that Antonio was unaware that his mother was in the barn when it was kind of like that, like, maybe the father just had no idea. You know, I mean, it seems like that Charlie or whatever, it was kind of like left for dead in a way.
So you think he just
So I don't
thought
know.
he killed Charlie and then just walked away from it, and then she just been using him as a plaything ever since then? Because he was chained up, I believe. And
Yeah, he was totally chained up right there in the middle of the barn, right? Like, if anyone had walked in there, it would have been totally obvious. But
And I
kind
think
of
it's
question if
also
he knew.
I think it's also implied that she did the work of his wounds,
yeah,
Francisca, because she obviously does it again, a second time, right? So, and it's the same wounds, the same cuts, the eye, the throat, and everything. So yeah, you got to wonder, like, how much, yeah, like how much her dad really knew, how much of a plaything he was for her.
even to that extent, like I kind of wonder if she was joking or not whenever she said she was the one that killed her father. You know, like we didn't really even talk about that, about how she said that to that Kimiko girl. But I don't know. Like it's hard to really sort of parse out if she actually killed him or not, or if he just sort of like died of natural causes and she, you know, took care of him or whatever like that. Anyway, just kind of like as a little side point there. Yeah, about the
It seemed
father.
like she wasn't very aware that he was even dead at times, because she was bathing him and begging for him to be, you know, more responsive to her. And it almost came across as she didn't quite get that he was dead, like that he was just completely turned himself off from her.
Well, that's an interesting point too, because I mean the fact if well, obviously I think that's a part where you really do start to see the work of loneliness showing through very clearly, in my opinion. But if her sort of need for a father figure is just the presence of a male body in the room or in the house or whatever like that, you know, if she's not really kind of like expecting that kind of like warmth in return, because he seemed like he was completely destroyed and completely shut down by the trauma, and so maybe that's just her sort of bar for a human interaction, is just this sort of non-actor kind of like
Cold,
being
distant
there.
guy. Ugh.
That's
Yeah.
so horrifying. That sucks. Yeah, you got to wonder if like he was closer to her as a dad when he was a corpse.
Right?
You know?
Because, like,
Jesus.
at least she was cuddling with him and stuff when he was on the couch when she was
That's
a corpse.
right.
And maybe that's what made it okay to, you know, dig up her mom too. She was hanging out with her dad's corpse for quite a while, and I don't think it came across to me she wasn't fully understanding that he was dead. So maybe she didn't have a real concept of what death even is.
Yeah, I
don't
can
know.
see I can see like in her mind the corpse at the dinner table, and she's like, God, he's so talkative tonight. You know, Jesus. God, when he had a heartbeat, he was so much more quieter. He won't shut up now that he's dead, you know? Yeah, the bar set so low, you know, for her, which is very interesting. By the way, one interesting thing with Charlie, the serial killer, she asks him, Francisca asks him later, she says, why us? Do you remember that? And do you remember what his answer was? Because you let me in. Very similar to the strangers. Why are you doing this to us? Because you were home. Like that scene in The Strangers is the most chilling quote in any horror film to me. I remember watching it, just getting the fucking hair on the back of my neck standing up. And he said something very similar in this. Why'd you do this to this? Because you let me in. Terrible.
Yeah, I mean,
Terrible.
the thing is if you actually look at real studies of true crime and serial killers and stuff like that, almost verbatim all the time why they choose someone who they decide to rape and attack, they made eye contact with me. That's what a lot of them say. And you guys want to wonder why women won't look you in the eye? It's because we know that serial killers say that all the time. We're just
That's
like,
right.
no thanks, I'm not looking at anybody in the eye now, because I might be inviting you to do something really, truly horrible.
Yep,
But
you've got to be very careful to make sure and let the right one in, if you will.
Well, that's why
true.
whenever I'm in an elevator and a woman looks me in the eye, the first thing I say to her is, "Well, time to die." You know, it's the first.
You asked for it.
It's
now.
just, you know what? It's going to make, gentlemen, if you're in an elevator and a woman looks in the eye, just get that out of the way. It'll make them way more comfortable.
No.
All right, it'll make them way more comfortable.
Very
Yeah, no, don't do that. That's bad advice. As you can see, as the film says, loneliness can do strange things to the mind. Pandemic Noah. This was not the film for Noah during the pandemic to watch. See, I'm referring to myself as a third person. That's how we're already going. The psychosis is starting.
Yeah. You saw some of yourself in this, and you were like, why am I into this girl so much? I'm finding out about my kinks today.
yeah.
Well, the reason why you asked the question is because you're like, you guys thought she was hot, right? I mean, like, hey.
Yeah. The eyes. I'm gonna title this video "The Eyes of My Mother: An Analysis of Kink, Necrophilial Kink." Yeah. Oh Jesus. We are so not gonna be on YouTube for much longer if we keep up with this. Yeah. All right. So let me. So here's a couple things I didn't like about this movie. I like most of what's in this movie. What I didn't like is the lack of change in mood. So the movie is, but I get why it's like that too. Like her mood throughout Francisca's mood and face and everything throughout the movie is very flat affect. But I got the sense that the film kind of felt like that too. Like the pace is very static. There's not much action up and down. There's not much, everything's very similarly paced throughout the entire film. This is one of those movies, no redemption, no catharsis, similar to Martyrs only in that sense. I think this is a way superior film to Martyrs, but it's similar in the sense that there's no cathartic release, there's no redemption or anything. But I think the way I describe that being a problem in Martyrs, I think is less of a problem. I'm more forgiving in this because I think I got more out of, like, there's more to chew on, I think, in this movie than there is in Martyrs. So I can kind of forgive a little bit of the lack of redemption and catharsis. I would have liked, this is kind of weird to say, I would have liked a little more time with the parents. And this, to me, I think would have solidified maybe a little bit more of their influence over Francisca, maybe given us slightly more insight into her aberrant behavior. So maybe just a little more time with her mom, maybe not her dad so much. But definitely more time with her mom. So the other thing I was going to say, we mentioned the truck driver at the beginning. One of the things that bothered me about that is, like, throughout the movie, it's hard. There's a lot of jumps, and it's hard to tell not whose perspective, but like the storytelling part of it is interesting because at the beginning you have this single shot perspective and it's the truck driver, but then you have these third person perspective throughout the rest of the movie. So it's like we're witnessing the stuff going on in her life, but then we get a first person thing. That was just kind of weird to me at first. And it's only like one scene that really felt that way to me, but it just felt like a little bit of a jolt. And I think that's it. I mean, for the most part, I felt like most of this movie, the art house part of it was very well done to me. I'm interested if you guys think this sort of if this movie or A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, like which of those feels superior in terms of being art house horror? I'm very curious where you land on these.
This is exactly where I was going to go with what I disliked about this movie. I liked the feel and look of it, but I liked it better when it was A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. I liked some of the elements of the people trapped in the barn, and it seemed pretty horrific. She, pops her finger. But I've seen better stuff in The Woman and in The Ring and a whole bunch of other freaking movies that have done these kinds of feels a little bit better, in my opinion. So, like, it kept coming across that way. It's not a bad film. It's just that every element of it, I've seen it done a little bit better from another movie. And so it just made it almost feel a little bit like it didn't go to the place it needed to go to. It kind of was like having an okay-ish orgasm. Where you're like, I had an orgasm, that's cool, but it wasn't like, woo.
It wasn't A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night sort of orgasm. I mean,
exactly.
Jesus, yeah, I gotcha.
That's interesting. I mean, I think I maybe got a different tone from you guys from it, that like I wouldn't necessarily compare it to that at all. Like I don't I get it. Obviously, like they're both in black and white. They have like a lot of kind of like, well, I don't know. Like I don't.
Okay, let me
say this. Like,
okay.
let me give you the positive affirmation. Like, as opposed to just the negative. Let me give you the positive. Like, I would compare this more to Hagazusa, to be honest. I feel like it's a lot more like that than it is A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night.
For the isolation piece, for the woman who's in like thematic. Oh, okay.
For all the parallels, I mean, like obviously there's no dad figure, but early on, like the entire first act of the 3-act structure of the movie is that like you have this woman whose mother dies at a very young age. She's left alone. She has no idea how to interact with the world. The people around her seem like largely, well, not hostile, but distant in a way. Like, there's just not a lot of emphasis put on the interaction there. It's just kind of like her and these things sort of happening to her until she eventually kind of does something that sort of makes her break. Even in the way that they portray violence, like obviously in Hagazusa, there are a couple places there where it's like incredibly violent, but it's not really kind of like the overall tone of the film, even though when they do whip it out, like it's incredibly potent. The violence just really sort of is emphasized because of the lack of violence in most of the rest of the movie. And obviously it's not shot like in black and white the way that this one is, but I mean, just thematically in terms of the parallels and the types of trauma and the focus on the next generation and how they have a kid and like what that kid means and what happens, like how in both cases they kind of end up getting sacrificed to the mother's trauma in a way. I mean, it's like they're very, very, very similar in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, thematically, I completely agree, 100%. I think in terms of like being an art house movie, though, I think that A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, the monochrome visuals, the art stuff, the way certain scenes are shot. So more like cinematically, I would make the comparison to A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night.
Do you think this one was shot in a way that makes it kind of like a Western? Because I don't know that I saw those shots either. More like definitely on the noir side.
Well, I definitely think there is some Western elements to this film, just because of the way it opened up with the truck driver driving towards. We're seeing it from his perspective, and then we move to a different perspective. A lot of Westerns will have an opening act that's kind of bizarro like that to kind of bring you into the story, which I know could be jolting at times, but that is sometimes how Westerns be like.
Yeah, a lot of westerns start with a body, like a person shot, leaving a town, falling down, right? Ben, I totally see what you're saying.
Yeah, and like even from that element too, like I feel like it leans more closely toward folk horror, because in folk horror you always have these crazy ominous shots of like the giant fucking forest. You know what I mean? Just like in The Witch, you get a lot of that. You know, it's a lot of the wide panning shots, but it's more like you're in the mountains and the woods as opposed to, you know, the setting of the American West or whatever. So
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of very specific things that they did in A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night that aren't like technically the exact same thing. I don't know, like I'm really fucking nitpicking here. I get that. But it's more like
it's
art
not
house
just the black and
folklore.
white. It's not just the black and white though. It's also the way the actors are not at the well, at least the main person is not very animated with how she behaves. It kind of reminded me of the main character from Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, where she
Really?
seems, yeah, like just the. I
She
mean,
dances
she's a
to
lot
music
less
though.
awkward. She's way more cooler, and she
Yeah,
also knows how
totally.
to
I mean,
dance and listen to music. So she's way cooler than
she has
Francesca.
passion. She has passion. Like I think
Right.
that's
But
the
she
difference in the main
still is
characters.
kind of muted in how she like reacts to how people like when people are doing something to her, she isn't like like
yeah,
most,
she has a
scream
mute
queens.
affect. Yeah, she has a very mute affect. I would agree with that.
So it's not as like scream queeny as some I would even say most horror movies have a protagonist act and behave. They're usually or antagonist. I don't know what you want to call either of these girls because they're kind of antagonist. I don't know. But
Anti-heroes in a way. Not even really anti-heroes.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know what you would call them. That's this has got to be like a thing that's becoming more and more common though in stories, because even with No Country for Old Men and all that stuff, we have these characters that are the main characters, but they're truly horrifying, but they're also kind of cool. Oops, and you're like, why do I like them? Oh, I'm messed up maybe. But I do think that they're much like No Country for Old Men too, a little bit muted in how they behave about things. They're not as there's not a lot of catchphrases too much, but when they do say something, it's like, whoa,
All
what?
three of those things are different though. Completely different. So the main character in A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, I see her as being guarded because they devote scenes to showing her inner passion, and then show how she keeps herself distant from the rest of the world on purpose because she's a vampire.
Mm-hmm.
In No Country for Old Men, I think they're leaning into that John Wayne kind of affect a little bit, stoic, kind of flat voice, that sort of thing, which is a totally different kind of thing than this, where Francisca is completely open. It seems like, um, and she's just
Her
like she's
idea of
so
open.
blunt. Yeah, I mean, she's like so blunt about the fact. She's like, yeah, I killed my father, you know, whatever. She just says
Mm.
this shit and has no reaction to it, even though other people are horrified by that's what, you know, she's like, you know, oh yeah, well, my mother died, my father's dead, and this other person's kind of like trying to empathize or whatever. She's completely out in the open and completely vulnerable. She just has no affect. And
That's
so like
interesting.
there's very, very
You know
different. I
what's
feel like
interesting when
there's
you
a lot
bring
of
that up?
subtlety between those three different types
There's
of mute affect.
there's a really important aspect of that. Since you are saying that the beginning or the main process of this movie is to show like our traumas are kind of hidden away, and that's what it's a metaphor for. This is exactly what it's like to go through trauma, though. This is why I've made jokes about this, but I'm being completely honest. I kind of like to have friends that are also broken like me, because there's a lot of times where I bring up my trauma, and people who have not been through some of that shit are just like, what the hell? And you're like, oh no, it's fine.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh shit, that was maybe too much for you. And it's just so
Well,
awkward.
that's why you're friends with Ben and I. I don't know if you guys know this, but Ben and I are live streaming from Shira's barn right now, where she keeps us.
Got some chains on them. I
Yeah,
got video games in there though. They love it. Jeez. But like it's true though, like when it comes to how that response is from her. She's trying to open up to people, but you can't open up to certain types of people because they won't understand the guy in your barn. They're not going to be able to
yeah.
comprehend
Yep.
it.
I think you're right. I think there are major distinctions between all three of these characters, but I think they're all bound by isolation. I think they all are reacting to isolation in their own ways. I think that two of the three are socialized and in very odd ways. So the vampire in A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night is socialized. She has social skills, very good social skills, actually. But she is guarded and knows how to use them, whereas Francisca has no referent. She just is open. That's totally true. When that girl comes over, I killed my dad. Let's kiss. You know, I mean, to some that's hot, but to others it's not. I'm not speaking about myself at all. But you know, and then you know, Anton Chigurh in Old Men, similar things there too. I think there's a whole separate set of motives for him. He's more, I think, sociopathic. But one of the things, it's interesting you brought that movie, because one of the things that movie did really well that was also in this movie is showing the not showing. There's tons of violence in No Country for Old Men, but there's one scene in particular at the very end of the movie where he kills the main character's like girlfriend or his wife, and you don't see it. You just see him walk out of the house and look at his boot, implying that there's blood on it. And I remember that messed me up. That was like, I was like, oh, that is so messed up. And it's very similar in this movie to when she's wiping up the blood of the woman coming over, you know? It's what you don't show. And then in terms of Hagazusa, Ben, I mean, clearly you should not be homeschooling your kids. That's what we learned from Hagazusa too. Isolation, being home in a countryside is bad. It's bad. It does bad things to the mind. Yeah, I mean, I think the mitigating factor in this movie and in all of the ones we've been connecting is really the idea that loneliness does weird, fucked up things to the mind in its own different ways. That we're social creatures. A huge part of ourselves, even, I'm sorry, even hate to say this to the introverts, even if you don't like going out and you're super introverted, a part of what makes you who you are is how you see yourself in light of X relationship, Y relationship, who you are as a student, a brother, a sister, a son, a friend. You know, your role is not in isolation ever, right? Which is why when we put people in isolation chambers, when we put them in cells in prison where they have no interaction at all, they go crazy and they claim it's worse than physical torture. Because the mind just plays tricks on you. There's something evolutionary about it, right? Which I think this movie kind of gives us a very interesting, aberrant picture of what goes wrong. You know, if you're homeschooled, clearly. Hey, so this whole movie was shot in 18 days, which is pretty wild. Whole movie was done in 18 days. One of the things I was very interested in, and this is somewhat similar to A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, was the music. So the music that is played a lot in the background of this movie is a type of music called fado music. And fado translates into sad destiny. And it is a Portuguese genre of music, traced to 1820s Lisbon, Portugal. And it's characterized by mournful lyrics, mournful tunes. It's often about the sea or the life of the poor, and it's infused with sentiment of resignation and melancholia. So it's not happy music, and that's what she's like playing all throughout her day. No wonder she's so messed up. This is like another message: don't get homeschooled. Don't listen to emo music all day. Clearly,
I was homeschooled and I listened to Radiohead a lot. Sorry.
Well, this is why we're chained up right now, Ben. Like, now we know why we're in this damn barn. Jesus.
I need to back up for a second. Did you say 18th century libs in Portugal? Is that what you said?
1820s in Lisbon, Portugal. Yeah.
Oh, in Lisbon. Okay.
Lisbon.
All right.
Yeah. Owns the libs. It's what they should have called it. 1820s owns the libs in Portugal. Yeah. Yeah. Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro was born 200 years ago. He'd be born in Own the Libs in Portugal. Jesus. All right. We're all over the place. Yeah, I mean, so do you guys have any other thoughts? That's all the thoughts I have for the film. I mean, I can rate it, but do you guys have anything else you want to add before we go into ratings, or are you guys good to just start rating it?
I think the only last thing I wanted to really point out is there's a lot of these movies where women are abducting, and then there's a lot of these movies where men are abducting, and it seems like the men abducting storyline has to do with obviously objectifying women, wanting to have lots of women caged up below. You know, we had Kevin from Sin City, played by Elijah Wood, with his glowing glasses. That was a horrifying bit. There was a couple of movies in the late 90s that had Morgan Freeman. I think there was like 2 of them that Morgan Freeman was in, where he's hunting down these these types of people. There's a lot of these movies that the guys are doing it just to own a woman, or the Collector from 1964, I think it was 1964. That one is where he is a banker. He's got a house. He's finally got all the stuff he needs, but he doesn't have a girlfriend. What is he to do? Oh, I know. I'll stalk a girl and just put her in my house, and she'll eventually fall in love with me because that's normal.
That's why I'm married. I did that exact same. Yeah.
Like it feels like whenever it's a guy, it's because they're trying to get a girl, or like trying to win him over, or maybe wear their skin, like in Silence of the Lambs. But I don't know, the girls, it just seems like they're just into capturing anybody and killing them. I don't know.
I feel like women definitely serve as a template for having more complex reasons for abducting and torturing people. Like with men, that at least a good part of the reason is because they're thinking with their balls, and they got balls and they got nuts, and they're thinking with their nuts, and they're torturing with their nuts, and everything's about their nuts. With men, it is all about the nuts, always. With women, it leaves more room for I think more complex reasons. I mean, there are obviously stories about men abducting women that have a significant amount of complexity to them, but I think with women, it removes that sort of like very what's the word I'm thinking of? Very like testosterone driven mentality and all the desires that come about because of that. And with women, I think when you have women torture, so think of Audition. I mean, it allows for things like revenge, a very interesting type of feminist revenge, at least in Audition. And there's a sense in which it provides a template for an almost more insidious kind of torture, that it's about other things. It's almost simplistic and naive and kind of like dull at this point when serial killers, the Morgan Freeman-esque movies, and I know exactly what you're talking about, Kiss the Girls and movies like that, where it's like clearly I gotta go save the girls, this guy is raping them, holding them and whatever. But like, can you imagine Morgan Freeman from Kiss the Girls trying to go save the dude from Audition? He'd have opened the door and been like, I'm out, I can't, this is not for me. I mean, this is the dude in Seven. I don't even think he could handle her from Audition. So yeah, I mean, I think women torturers, women serial killers, there's more fun I think directors and writers can have with them, because it allows the motivations to be more expansive. You know what I mean? I think initially you could probably do the same thing with men if you were a thoughtful writer director, but it seems like in horror there's not a lot of those these days. So
wow, is this one way that writers have toxic masculinity? They can't write more in-depth male abductors? Like that's
a challenge, Hollywood. Right? Yeah, let's fix that. Totally. I mean, and and there's been some that do it these days. Saw is more complex than just fucking. There's clearly political and ethical reversals in Saw. So there are people doing that today, but the 90s was just, and early 2000s was just terrible for that shit. Terrible. Every other fucking movie was about, capturing and owning and raping, and you know what I mean? So I feel like we just got bored with that as a genre. You're right. Like, I think horror just got bored of that. You know what I mean? And we're like, oh, let's think of more fucked up shit,
And then it somehow had women in it. But you know what? I think that's one of the reasons why The Loved Ones was interesting, though, is that is a woman just abducting guys because she's thinking with her nuts.
Yeah, and not only that, if you remember in The Loved Ones, she tries to remove his nuts. Remember, she's about to nail his penis in the seat. If you guys haven't seen The Loved Ones, it's super fucked up. Australian horror movie, woman, yeah, but I mean, she's like, oh, look it, and he's like, you better pee. If you don't pee, I'm gonna nail, and I'm just like, oh, for sweet mother of God. Like, so I think it gives you that kind of fun, when you have a woman torturer, You get to not only not about the balls, you get to like mess with the guys who have the balls, which is, to me, that's horrifying. That's scary.
A little bit of a flip. It honestly, I had never seen anything like that, flipped like that, and that was still a fascinating one. I think I like that one a little bit more than this one, but I don't know. It's so hard because that one is just. It holds a dear place in my heart because it really messed with me. There were so many parts that I was uncomfortable, much like Antichrist. I had to turn away. I couldn't watch anymore. I was like, oh, Jesus, when is this over? But then in a way, I had to show a friend right afterwards, you know?
Yeah, like The Loved Ones is a much more fun movie. It's a lot more funnier. I mean, this is a very somber, melancholy sort of movie. This movie, right? Eyes of My Mother, and I think The Loved Ones is more visceral, fun, enjoyable, disgusting, right? Like this is more thoughtful, art house. Fuck with you late at night when you're going to sleep. I don't know. To be honest, The Loved Ones did that too. That nut scene where she's about to that. I hate to keep harping on that, but that was like I could feel it. I was like, oh, I was like holding out a cup. I was like, oh, shit. But you know, so
it was essentially a flipping of the power dynamic. That's why it bothered you so much, man. It's because she was trying to take away that power.
Totally,
Exactly
it's visceral. It's evolutionary. It's the caveman thing. But yeah, I mean,
once again they didn't show that
That's right.
The way that
Oh,
the
God,
camera
thank
was
God.
angled, you didn't actually see her about to do that. And I think once again, this goes with why this movie worked for me, at least, is not showing and making my imagination go, oh my God, why? Because I think we're all just a little bit more messed up than what these film creators could be.
Well, Ben more than everyone else, because in Ben's movie Antichrist, there is penis damaging, like, and you see it full frontal. In Antichrist, the guy comes blood in Antichrist.
Yeah, I've got to say that moment of actually visualized viscerality is quite a bit more potent than any sort of Hitchcockian thing that I've ever seen.
Maybe
Lars von Trier really kind of.
Well, I think it's. To be frank, no pun intended, it's the organ that I think makes it so visceral. I think, like, if it was the arm, I can see not showing a cutting off an arm and showing the person's face and showing their pain being more visceral than showing the actual cutting. But with a dick, showing the actual damage to the penis,
it's not even just that though. Like I don't even know if that part is as bad as when she does it to herself in a sense. You know what I mean?
Oh,
that's right. That one was worse.
At least it was equal opportunity, you know.
Yeah.
Yep.
Don't say Lars isn't a feminist. Yeah. Don't be shitting on Lars, people. He's equal opportunity. You're gonna hit the vagina. You're gonna hit the penis. He was like, we got to do this fair. Come here, give me the scissors. You know.
God, that movie was seriously messed up. Seriously, you guys got to watch Antichrist. I'm sure we'll have a blurb about it.
It's one of our most viewed podcasts now, by the way.
Oh, really?
Antichrist. Yes, it is one of our most viewed podcasts where
Maybe
we all just
people are too afraid to actually watch it, so they're just like, let's watch someone talk about it.
I was for years. I was afraid to watch it for years. I only watched it because it was a selection on the podcast. But I'm very glad I did. It is a fantastic movie, and I'm glad I have it under my belt. God, no pun intended. But yeah, and it's great in what it does show.
Let me ask this question then, because I get this from a lot of older people who don't like so much of the violence. They usually ask me about horror movies. Is there a lot of blood in this one? Is this a really overly violent one? I think I'd have a hard time answering that question with this film. Would you consider this a bloody, violent film or not?
That's a really good question. That goes back to the thing that I said to Ben and kind of our conversation about, like, man, I remember this being way more violent than I thought. And I led Ben to think that. And then I'm like, well, it's not really as violent, especially for Ben. Like, Jesus, like, this was like probably like fucking rated G for your selections. Jesus. But yeah, like I wouldn't pick this for someone who says, hey, I want to watch a horror movie, but I'm not keen on a lot of violence. I would not pick this because I think the violence is so heavily implied and so done so well, and you see the aftermath of that violence with so much gravity that you might as well be watching it. Sometimes the violence is in the aftermath. It's not in the action, right? And this movie is a keen example of that. I think that it would mess someone up who doesn't want to see violence at all. So I would not choose this as a film for them to see at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I think we've pretty much established this is probably a violent film. Maybe not as
I would say go watch Martyrs. Go watch Martyrs. Yeah.
No.
Much less violent, that one.
No. Oh, okay. I'm like just having flashbacks because I watched both of them and they were both so violent.
Yeah, when I watch horror movies with my wife. She has a lot of friends, and so when they ask, like, hey, I've been asked that basically when we go out, like, I know you like horror movies, like, I want to watch a horror movie, but I don't want to watch one with a lot of violence. So I'll typically pick movies like Babadook, more cerebral horror films, I think. I don't pick like Conjuring style ones, even though those don't, they're PG-13 and they don't have a lot of violence. I just don't think they do a lot of, I want people to see really good, well-made, thought out horror movies. You know what I mean? So I would go like, what do you guys think? If someone says to you right now, I want a good horror movie with not a lot of violence or even no violence, I would probably say, I was going to say It Follows, but It Follows has a lot of violence in it. Babadook is the first one that comes to mind. Like, what are some other ones that we've covered?
Well, I couldn't do Come and See. That was
No.
that was really
Well,
intense.
it's definitely gonna have to be like Creep,
Creep.
the first one,
Yeah.
kind of, because you only get to the very end. But also maybe like Shaun of the Dead, because it's kind of violent, but also it's couched in comedy, so it doesn't feel violent at all.
Zombieland.
Like, well, right, yeah, exactly,
Zombieland.
exactly,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, maybe they just have to have elements of comedy to help relieve our dear friends.
It really is all about the framing. The lens with which you view the violence is what determines whether or not it seems violent, I guess.
Which is what we learned from this movie about the lens. Oh shit, man.
Yep.
Fuck. That was beautiful.
Yeah, somewhere the director's watching this going, they got it. They understood. It's all about the lens, you know?
Love
Interesting. All right, well, let's rate this movie and score it.
I thought this was a pretty good movie. I've watched it twice now, so I'll probably watch it again. So it does have rewatchability to it, which is pretty rare with horror movies, I think. There's a lot of horror movies that I'm just like, okay, I watched it, I'm done forever with that one. But this one feels like it's very rewatchable. Like there's things I might have missed. I gotta check this out. But I don't know. It fucks you up. I have to be in the right mindset because it is a little bit dark and sad. And it gives you your own element of loneliness and sadness inside. And so you have to be in the right mindset. But I don't know. I think I'll watch it again. I think I'll give it a 3.5. It was a pretty good film. I liked it. Definitely recommend to people that want some sadness in their life, need something dark and sad.
Yeah, pandemic, style. If it's not sad enough for you, watch The Eyes of My Mother. There you go.
I mean, for me, I think I probably enjoyed it a little bit more than that. I mean, I do really sort of like the art house films, So yeah, I mean, there's a lot that I really enjoyed about this, and because I mean, you really can kind of dig into. I mean, again, like I think the main thread of the story is probably pretty clear, but there's still like enough that you can just sort of keep circling and going around that thread and thinking about it, that it becomes a really interesting movie to watch and to think about. And I just to go beyond, I think a little bit of what we've already talked about. I mean, it is kind of interesting to think that. So much of your perception of yourself and not just the perception of yourself, but the actual construction of the self relies so much on views from other people, right? Like, and we were talking about how we have like social context and how that helps to shape our lives a little bit and ground us, but also to allow us to deal with trauma a little bit more effectively. I mean, yeah, don't homeschool, right? I guess that's, I mean, we keep joking about that, but I mean, it's really important to be able to kind of ground yourself in connections with others, because that allows you to sort of move past, I think, the past and kind of like move on to sort of like a better future, no matter what you were handed down as a child, regardless of the sort of like familial kind of like baggage or like the baggage that you pick up along your life. There's a way that you can make that burden a little bit easier just by kind of finding yourself in other people, in a sense. So there's a really cool sort of like thing to kind of dig into with this movie, and it was incredibly well shot. I really did enjoy the cinematography. I wouldn't necessarily compare it to some of the things that has been compared to today, but I definitely understand the comparisons and the perspective. I mean, the fact that you see so many elements from so many great films in this movie, I think is a good thing. Because they do blend together quite well. It doesn't really feel like you're watching any of those films. You can just recognize it and see, wow, I mean, they really sort of like brought in these cool elements and blended them together in a way that makes kind of like a unique piece of art. So absolutely fantastic. I think I'm going to give this a 4 out of 5. Highly recommended. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think I agree. I'm going to give it a 4, just like you. I think that this movie is well shot. It's very pretty. It's one of those movies that's gorgeous and profane. It is gross, but just beautiful. And there's something to be said for movies like that do that well, right? I think doing it mean, monochrome was a good idea. There was a big criticism for a lot of people that was like, oh, it's trying too hard because it's monochrome. But I think it adds the flatness of that is like in conjunction with the flat affect we see in the character. I think it plays a role as almost a character in the movie, and the cinema style and the monochrome dynamics of everything. I mean, it all kind of comes together and makes sense to me. But overall, this is a movie with a lot of meat on its bone. It's a lot of interesting things to discuss about socialization and loneliness and familial habits and rituals. And it's got like stuff we talk about on this podcast in very distinct ways all throughout other movies. All like we have movies that are just all about familial stuff, movies that are all about loneliness, you know, and this movie kind of like jumps a little bit and jack of all trades it sort of. Which I think is cool. I'd give it a 4 out of 5. Definite recommend. And if you like movies like this, but it's not violent enough, go watch Antichrist. It's like they're flip sides to the same coin. I think in this movie, it's what's not shown is a part of the violence, and in Antichrist, it's what's shown that is the massive part of the violence. But I think that they feel similar in some weird ways to me. It's just very strange. Those movies seem to make sense and connect in some ways. So I'll just leave it at that. But I really like this movie. I'll definitely watch it again. 4 stars. It's definitely flawed. It's not perfect. But a definite recommend, considering just the hodgepodge of shit that's out there in the horror genre. This is one to watch. It should be on everyone's like top 50 horror movies ever, I think. Yeah, so those are my thoughts. So 3.5 and 2 4s. Well, hey, if you enjoyed watching us talk about this horror movie, give us a like, subscribe to our channel. We are on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. A little bit on Twitter. Twitter's mostly just for arguing, so we're not on Twitter that much. But we're on Spotify, iTunes, SoundCloud. We're everywhere. You cannot escape the Deadly Analysis podcast. If you do, we just chain you back up and put you in the barn. So check us out on all of our social media avenues. We'll see you guys in a couple weeks. If there are any other movie recommendations, maybe art house horror films, ultra-violent horror films that you would like us to watch, we already did Martyrs. Okay, it was your recommendation, all of you, and we watched it and we did it, and I vomited 7 times like during the fucking movie. So if there's anything else like that, something that feels like this, let us know in the comments below, and we'll see you guys in next week for our next podcast. Take care.